For 20 years, we've been creating innovation in the CX industry, and now we're seeking out brilliant new perspectives on CX you just won't find anywhere else. I'm Richard Owen. Welcome to the CX Iconoclast. My guest today is a repeat offender on the CX Iconoclast podcast and a good friend of ours, Michael Schrage from MIT. Today, Michael and I discussed the idea, well, what if your key performance indicators could actually talk back to you and potentially even guide your business forward? Not such a crazy idea in the era of interactive artificial intelligence. Using this, we explore how AI is, of course, transforming not just customer experience metrics, but the very nature of leadership and organizational capability. We talk about why so many companies stick with legacy key performance indicators despite the seismic shifts in technology we're seeing around us, and how conversational AI and let's call them chat modified metrics are helping forward-thinking leaders turn massive data into proactive guidance. Michael also introduces the revolutionary idea of building digital twins of your key performance indicators, which gives organizations, in his view, a sort of GPS for where they are and where they should go next. As we progress, I think you'll see that our conversation does go deep into some of the critical distinctions between insights and actionable insights, something that I think matters to a lot of us because a challenge to get over that hurdle, some of the cultural silos that hold companies back, and how this type of AI-enabled measurement can fuel experimentation, faster decisions, and ultimately all results in customer-led growth. Michael, of course, brings some exceptional real-world examples to the table. And I think he does a great job of really challenging leaders to move beyond this sort of traditional dashboard approach to a much more dynamic dialogue. Whether you're in the process of leading a digital transformation or you're just early into your exploration of AI, I think you'll find this episode to be a compelling example of how companies can turn metrics into momentum. I hope you really enjoy the conversation. Okay, so Michael, welcome back. Good to see you. How are you today?
Doing well. I look forward to this.
Good. And Brian and I were talking about earlier. I mean, you and I picked up a conversation in New York a few weeks ago. And of course, naturally, the theme was very much about how corporations choose to manage themselves and the whole topic of coming up with a sort of optimal KPI set, which, as you know, is a topic near and dear to my heart and something you've written about extensively. And this whole idea that companies could be more sophisticated about this and so create customer optimal objectives. And you'd said something to me quite striking. I think I suggested the pickup for this was slower in the corporate world than I'd expected. And your reaction was, why are you surprised by that? So let's start with this. You're obviously unsurprised by the challenges companies having are adopting this. Well, let's start with that perspective. Why is that not a surprise? Why isn't this something that's being more widely adopted?
The main reason, in my professional opinion and observation, is that it's a lot easier to lazily default to what most people are doing than to really invest even a little bit of effort and initiative in getting an edge or value added. I think there are two pathologies I reliably and consistently observe. The first is organizations pick and choose from a menu of legacy KPIs, customer experience, NPS, CSAT, etc. And they say, these are the KPIs we're going to use. And then there's a certain set 'em and forget 'em quality, which is even though these KPIs exist for 2-3 years, they really don't, even during times of tumultuous change and disruption, they really don't revisit, rethink, and revise the fundamentals of what makes those KPIs valuable. My tongue-in-cheek line that I have used to provoke at least a certain level of self-awareness and self-consciousness by these sorts of leaders and managers and executives is ROKPI. You have a KPI, what's your return on that KPI? Is it simply a box tick exercise, or are you seeing it as a mechanism to facilitate, invite, and enable insights? A different approach. Gee, why don't we weight this measure more than that measure? What kind of conversation or debate occurs? So this is a long-winded way of saying most legacy organizations are more comfortable with inertia than innovation or insight.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to maybe, one of the things that's been on my mind, and what you say sort of reminds me of this question, is, first of all, I completely agree. There's this notion of the reticence to change. I mean, I think that's just a natural human thing, right? And that we've seen this manifested in many kinds of ideas. And I think the one that I tend to fall back on the most is this idea of, early adopters versus mature markets, and how things tend to kind of back up and behind the leaders and then eventually tip, right? There's this kind of tip usually. You can think about it, crossing the chasm kind of terminology if you want.
Tipping points, whatever.
Tipping points, the Gladwell stuff. But if you think about the dynamics of this market change, it's really different than a lot of the ones I've seen hit business from the tech side. So if I lived through internet, and I lived through mobile, and I lived through cloud. All of those had a really big hardware disbursement component that was causing stuff to back up, right? Until there were lots of smartphones, that wasn't going to get realized. Until there's lots of bandwidth lift, internet was kind of backed up behind that a little bit. This one feels a little bit different in the sense that I don't really see a hardware thing. So are we going to kind of move faster to the tip, do you think, in this particular market? Or is it going to play out on similar and familiar timescales like all the other ones as people start to move into AI-driven KPIs and that sort of thing?
So I definitely accept the notion. I'm not going to embrace your hardware framing as much as I'm going to say the infrastructure of these things.
Sure.
I would say in 2025, and certainly for sure in 2026 and 2027, more touch points are going to be instrumented, be they human touch points, be they API, digital touch points. The whole notion of telemetry and instrumentation transforms the economics of information analysis and insight for measurement and KPIs. I think the pervasiveness and persistence of infrastructure is something that most organizations really are not as familiar with as they should be. I was doing work with one organization literally the other week, and I asked them about certain correlations and asked them, had they checked their logs on these things? And the thought had never really crossed their mind. They were looking at their dashboards rather than the logs. And there was more of a discontinuity and a gap between that. They would rather roll up spreadsheets than interrogate or scrape a log on it.
Yeah.
So by the way, just to connect this, if I am in the OCX business, is DevOps an enabler or a partner for what I really want to do? Is the cadence going to be real time, like streaming, mark to market end of day every week? These are non-trivial issues. Now, to connect this directly to how you concluded, I will say that one of the things that genuinely surprises me in all this is that you look at a Google and you look at an Amazon, and these are two literally trillion-dollar organizations, and they have a reputation for being measurement-driven, KPI-driven, OKR-driven. They have strong, powerful metrics cultures. You would think at least a certain number of organizations would say, we should sort of skim off the best practice or take a Pareto. What are the 20% of metrics that would generate 80% of the value and insights for us approach? But they're not doing that. And some of that I think is demographic, and some of that I think is they're overwhelmed. They're looking for, give me an easy chat GPT kind of way. And the irony is, and I know you want to pop in, Richard, the easiest thing I have done with organizations is take a KPI and turn it into a freaking chatbot. That's what you begin. Instead of looking at your dashboard, you have a conversation.
So I want to pick up that conversational KPI in a second, but I want to present an alternative view from Brian's in terms of the evolution of all of these technologies and the limiting factors.
Yeah.
And suggest the limiting factors is always humans. This is the problem. And a management adoption has less to do with a prevalent technology and the practicalities of it, and more to do with the limits of, let's say, ambition, talent, satisficing versus maximization, right? To what degree are leadership teams actually seeking to dramatically drive their business? Look, if most companies don't grow, most companies don't achieve differential shareholder rewards, you're paid to do those two things. If you're in a leadership position, you're not doing either. So, isn't the reality that every wave of technology, and Brian framed it as, the sort of adoption crossing the chasm curve,
right?
Aren't the difference in the early adopters and the late adopters consistent for every wave of technology? And it's to do with management capabilities and cycles. And so therefore, no matter how good the technology, no matter how transformative it is, the same people who said, bah humbug, the web's not going to change my business, bah humbug, mobile isn't, bah humbug, AI isn't. And we're not going to change that. That's human nature.
I first, let me acknowledge and admire your cynicism in this regard. I think it's really justified.
My cynicism is admirable.
Well, whether it may or may not be admirable, but it's certainly accurate and justified.
Okay, I'll take that. Thank you.
There's a famous quote from the late British economist Kenneth Boulding that I love. He said, you can divide the world into two groups of people, those who divide the world into two groups of people and those who do not. And I think your cynicism emerges from what I've observed as these two groups. There's a lot of executives and senior managers who believe they command a premium because they have good guts. They have a good intuition, and their leadership and their style is guided by the North Star of their intuition and intuitive powers. What we've seen with all the digital stuff is the schism between organizations that defer to gut-driven leadership and insight to data-driven and analytics-driven leadership and insight. And the confounding, if I may use the statistical aspect here, the confounding factor here, and the word confound is particularly appropriate, is that oftentimes gut-driven people use data-driven analytics to justify and support the narrative that they seek to impose on the organization. I think it is very, very hard, and this goes right back to your point about human weakness, Richard. I think it is very, very hard for people who have risen to a level of power and influence and respect in an organization to have and display the epistemic and cognitive humility to defer to the data, to defer to the analytics in decision making. And I think that one of the awkward but intriguing things about an OCX is that it both invites and forces people in an accessible and non-threatening way to say, how seriously are we going to take these customer findings, these data findings? And I, for the record, I'm not a therapist. You know, what I have found, and I wrote a piece on this, over 20 years ago. I was at the Media Lab during its heyday at MIT. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Nicholas Negroponte was running it, and the big academic cliche of the time was publish or perish. Now we have different academic cliches, but that's for another podcast. But at the Media Lab, it wasn't publish or perish. It was demo or die. And people were less interested in publishing papers than doing a demo that knocked people's socks off. But let me tell you what I observed as first a guest and then as a researcher there. The most effective demos were not the ones where the grad students and the professors showed the demo and persuaded people that this was a breakthrough. It was the ones where they gave the demo to the people and the people played with it. And the genius insight that I came away with, and it was just an observational insight, the genius insight is that the most effective researchers didn't persuade people. They allowed people to persuade themselves. It is much easier to get people, it is much more effective not to sell somebody, but to put somebody in a position to sell themselves. And just to connect this to the AI trend, this is one of the reasons why I think large language models, Claude, ChatGPT, Grok, have been so successful. You start playing around, you ask it questions, say, hey, this is valuable to me. By the way, the mean time to payback, almost instantaneous. Google, how long did it take for you to get a response to a search? Milliseconds. So I think the real challenge, it's both a marketing and a technical challenge. How do we put people in a position to persuade themselves that these metrics, these key performance indicators are valuable? I believe my tentative hypothesis is the chatbotification of metrics is going to be the most intriguing, provocative, evocative, and seductive way to get people to persuade themselves that, oh my gosh, this is really a different way of gaining insight, actionable insight on what we should be doing next.
So chatbotification. So make that a little bit more real for me in the context of these metrics, right? Because you'd hinted at that in the last answer. There's going to be some interaction here. And so what's that look like?
So I've done this. I've now done over 20, 25 of these things all over the world. Indonesia, Malaysia, Brazil, and, East Coast, West Coast, and Midwest. Yet, I'll begin with the sophisticated people. The sophisticated people give you their spreadsheets, they give you their SQL databases, and you start off by putting them in, you anonymize and aggregate certain things, but you put them into an LLM context window and start saying, you personify saying, you are the customer lifetime value, or you are the customer experience KPI. Tell me the most important things I should know about you based on these spreadsheets, this PDF, this SQL file, this SQL table. And you see what happens. And I did this with a unicorn, the RevOps group for a unicorn cybersecurity firm, 35,000 customers in their freemium category. And I'll skip the boring details, but they didn't do a good job of segmenting it was just freemium, it was the trial. And the issue was, how do we came up with conversion interrogatories. How do we convert? What should the KPIs be for identifying likelihood to convert, propensity? So now we began to mash up propensity with conversion, with freemium, with terms, et cetera, et cetera. I'm now calling this vibe analytics. But the point is, the nature of the engagement was different. You facilitated play instead of programming. You didn't do the classic BI or BI, what's the formal methodological extraction? You did, I'm interested in this. Tell me something that I can react to.
So how much of that is just interrogative? I mean, the way in which we access information, because you could look at the lens of large language models and say, there's two components to them from my perspective. One is the chat interface, which is extremely compelling, right?
Right.
We've put sort of bolted on natural language processing bidirectionally. That gives us a much easier to use interface, prompting. But behind that, there's also the fact that it's able to essentially frame responses in really useful ways, right?
Right.
And so take that
which can be fine
metaphor and
tuned.
apply that to KPIs.
Right. But it can be fine tuned. You can put RAG databases. There are all kinds of things you could do. I think I'll be blunt. I'll throw it out there. I think for organizations like your own, there's going to be a negotiation between your capabilities, your client's capabilities, and either a small language model or a large language model context for these things. I will also say, I'll use this word in a podcast. The ontology is different. One of the most important things I have come away with, and it shocks me on this. It shocks me. There's a world of difference between an insight and an actionable insight. Some organizations have insights and that it's over the wall. The marketing insights team comes up with something and they hand it over to the marketing or the customer success people. And the customer success marketing people can't do a bloody thing with it. Yes, it's an insight, but they don't have an infrastructure. They don't have an agency. They don't have a way of enacting that. There are other organizations, actionable. It's remarkable that you give them something, and by the end of the week, if not sometimes by the end of the next day, you have an A/B experiment going on based on that actionable insight. So, this is one of the real challenges, which is here you are, you're offering KPI, you're offering something that really does tell them something new. Do they have the power to act on it? What can they do with this delta of information, this delta of analytics you proffer them? And again, I concede that humans suck on a certain dimension.
I think sometimes though people are just they've got an orientation problem more than a capabilities problem. So if you think about, I'll use us as an example. We're by no means unique.
Yeah, but I want to interrupt. I want to say, notice what you've done. You have now created a profoundly that everybody listening to this, a profoundly valuable customer segmentation. It is worth a lot to know if your prospect has a orientation problem or a capabilities problem. That information is incredibly valuable, because I can tell you, with most of the organizations I work with, it's a capabilities issue. They want to, and then when they look at their assets, when they look at their people, they literally can't do it in the next 100
you've got a
years.
little adverse selection going on there.
That's exactly right. Well put. Well put.
The point I would make is that as you get deeply into kind of exercising this new paradigm, which is really an AI-driven paradigm, and you sort of get comfortable with this idea that intelligence is a commodity you can call on, which is what really kind of happens in these situations. You build, in our case, we're building, basically we're orchestrating a number of agents to deliver back something like a next best action to a team. Just as an example. What it really calls on there is not a deep and profound knowledge of metrics, of BI. Actually, it's much more like managing teams or people. There's a management interface, knowing how to ask the right questions, knowing how to give the right directives, knowing how to shape people's interrogation of the data. And there are a lot of innate capabilities inside of companies today to do those types of things. They just don't see those as the means to what they're doing here. But I think as you start to really get involved in this, as you have, and you're really tearing down prompts and you're looking at what is a system prompt, what is a user prompt, what is the role. I think what you start to realize is it feels more like managing people or teams than writing tech, right? You're basically conversational in a lot of ways. What do you think about that?
I could not agree with you more. I think the notion of that, then it becomes, what kind of conversations are the most productive and constructive?
Yeah.
Now, there's one snap in the tail I want to offer to your intelligence aspect here.
Mhm.
And I say this as somebody who is using large language models roughly 90 minutes a day on this. One should not minimize or marginalize the difference and distinction between an effective prompt, a prompt designed to get you a certain kind of outcome, and an affective prompt, a prompt with a tone that is designed to give you a certain kind of tone. And what you will find, what everybody finds who explores these things seriously, is that you can have a mental model of a persona of a customer and do effective prompts. But if you also, in an A/B experiment kind of way, do affective prompts and deal with tones, you realize the instructions, the guidance, the outputs, they're tonally, dare I say, substantively different. And this is the beauty of it, to my mind. The beauty of this is going to force senior leaders and managers to step up. It's culture. What kind of balance between effect and affect do we want to have? Where are we optimizing cost at the expense of brand health, brand equity, customer perceptions? These are no longer hypothetical issues. These are issues that can be literally prompted into visualizable trade-offs.
Mhm.
And what's the difference? The difference is these are data-driven and analytic-driven, not just in a formal decision method sort of way, but in a way where embeddings, encodings, etc., can give you different perspectives on the same agreed upon ground truth data. I think that's huge, and I think that represents the beginning of a revolution in return on KPIs.
Mm. Mm.
Let's let's switch topic for a second if we could. So, if we're thinking today, and I'd like to sort of have Brian sort of chip in on this, because as we're all implementation orientated, right? So you yourself and ourselves, we're all off
Right.
trying to do this. LLMs, you say, caught everyone's imagination, create a skyrocketing of interest. There seems to be a perspective that either this topic is either overhyped today or even underhyped. And in some ways, the tech industry's classic hyping could just be a red herring, because what it does was it sort of turns management teams off, right? At some level, you're so tired of being told that this is transformative that you actually stop seeing it is transformative.
Right.
There's a sense that, and you're being oversold to, plus there's AI washing going on. So if we imagine ourselves maybe 1 to 3 years down the line, which is a reasonable horizon, especially given the pace of technology, what do you see as being the most profound difference in how leadership teams execute their organizations? If we were to have the opportunity to guide management through this, what would we say is the big difference they should be shooting for 3 years from now? Is it capability? Is it just everything should be focused on that? Is it resetting the orientation, to use your language, and letting somehow 1,000 roses bloom across the enterprise? Because that seems very uncharacteristic of most organizations to actually do that. And experimentation can be valuable. It also can just result in a lot of sandboxes. What would your advice be?
The reason why I'm hesitating answering on this question is one of the greatest mistakes I've realized I've made over the last 10, 15 years is that I would double down on what I thought and felt was a clearer, more explicit, more specific, more compelling vision of the future, as opposed to in the brutal day-to-day reality, meeting people where they are. You have to begin with where people are. So I wrote a book called Who Do You Want Your Customers to Become? I believe that innovation is not just faster, better, cheaper. It's an investment in the human capital, capabilities, creativity, competence of your customers and clients. So I believe that these technologies are not just technologies, that they are in fact capabilities that allow you, empower you to transform yourselves so that you can better transform your customers and clients. That's huge. What are the next steps? We've discussed one that I consider to be not just important, but urgent to play with right now, i.e., make your KPIs, make your current metrics more intelligent, more conversational. But what do you do after that? Well, virtually everybody that I've dealt with in capital intensive industries understand, if not embrace, digital twins as a cost-effective medium and mechanism for, what do we optimize? What do we innovate? I believe passionately and demonstrably that one of the smartest things I see my clients and classes doing is building digital twins of their KPIs, of the metrics that matter most for them, so they can begin to simulate trade-offs. And this is where the other cultural and readiness thing becomes apparent. I'm going to use a 4-letter word that I guarantee you will be sick of, but you will not
We're
censor.
getting ready with the bleep button here, by the way.
Yeah, don't, please, I beg you not to bleep this 4-letter word. That 4-letter word is silo. The pathology and dysfunction I have seen in so many organizations, they say, oh, great, we're going to have better KPIs. And they have their CLV silo, they have their cash flow silo. They siloize their KPIs. And what happens? The humans get together every 90 days to horse trade and negotiate between. No, you have to have your KPIs talk with one another. You have to manage them like a portfolio. And that's, by the way, what the best digital twins do. You don't just optimize a particular machine. You optimize the engagement, the interaction, the workflow between the machines, the TEEP, the optimal order flow on these things. So I think we have to give people easy, simple, and accessible mechanisms so they can say, this trade-off makes sense in a way that trade-off does not. So what is this a call to action for? The call to action for the vision of the future is they need a measurement infrastructure where it's not just the humans talking with the intelligent KPIs, the KPIs. The KPIs are talking with each other, and the human beings are being the moderator, the facilitator, the interlocutor, and to go to Brian's point, the team leader on this, the motivator. You need to folks, you need to up your game on this. What data do you need to be better? Is it structured data? Is it unstructured data? Is there a spreadsheet missing that could help you? Do you want to see the unstructured transcripts from the call center, from the contact center? We can do that for you. That's the nature of the dialogue and debate that I see happening within the next 3 years. Within the next 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the companies who step out and succeed and perhaps dominate their category are going to be the ones who find their way through this time of change. The one thing I think no one can debate is we are in a period of change. When we get to the end of next 3 years, things will be fundamentally different.
Absolutely.
They're already moving so fast.
As they were with the internet and with mobile, except perhaps a little bit faster.
Yeah, I think faster. I think actually my 2 cents, even bigger, more profound of a change than those things brought about. I think the ones who succeed are going to find the way to understanding the role shift, right? That maybe they're going to be, to use your term, the mediator or the orchestrator of these kind of technologies. And these technologies are, without getting too sci-fi, are becoming more like entities than they used to be. They're not just dumb software sitting on a disk waiting for you to give it an explicit instruction. They're able to work on your behalf. And so I think that,
I think it's charming that you said disk instead of server, by the way.
yeah, sure. And so they're there doing that. I think there's another change that we run into all the time, and I would love to hear some of your thinking about this. And I think at the end of the next 3 years, we'll see people who have transcended this kind of gulf. Is that no matter what we say, our organizations are innately reactive today. They're reactive. They're looking at descriptive, actual analytics that are historicals.
Right.
And then as we try to reorient people to being proactive, it necessarily means thinking probabilistically, thinking predictively, embracing possible futures that AI is actually really good at expressing. And I think we got to get people comfortable with making that move. That I think it's not at all controversial to say I want to be more proactive. And I think if you can see these new technologies as a means to truly becoming more proactive, then I think that's going to be a tailwind, and it's going to help these management thinkers who are thinking in terms of like being more proactive with their decision making. It'll help them embrace new KPIs that are more dynamic, that are more probabilistic, that are more predictive.
So I think what you're saying is very profound, and I see elements and aspects in my own work, and I want to be slightly technical in my response to you here. The LLM revolution is a revolution in generative AI, which of course is inherently stochastic and probabilistic. But the reality is we can do a mashup, a hybridization between generative AI and predictive AI. And we can make those KPIs not just do a better job of reviewing and reflecting and summarizing and synthesizing past performance, but we can decide to put a thumb on the scale and make them predictive, proactive. What portion of our CLV, customer lifetime value, should be predictive? What portion of our customer sat for certain kinds of segments or persona be predictive? How much should we weight the past in the prediction anticipation of the future? These are going to be algorithmic issues. These are going to be neural net training issues, but these are also going to be human judgment issues. And so I completely agree with you. But here's one of the most important mind shifts that have to occur, that we have to stop looking at KPIs as here's where we are at a moment in time. This is where we are now. The line that I've been using is, and it was funny because I did this in collaboration with both ChatGPT and Claude. I had the insight that how should we think of KPIs in a digital infrastructure world? And the epiphany I had was we should think of KPIs as GPS, global positioning systems, digital infrastructure. They tell you where you are, but the real value of a GPS is that it helps guide you to where you want to go. And so there's also the Waze approach. You can have the democratization of these things as opposed to top down. So what's the right balance in a GPS system in telling you where you are and where you need to go next? Should you go the longer route to avoid traffic, et cetera, et cetera? These are human judgment calls as well as algorithmic and training judgment calls. And this is a long-winded way of saying, how should organizations strike a better balance between the legacy best practice of KPIs, i.e., this is the best summary and synthesis of data, versus we're prepared to let go a little bit on summary and synthesis in exchange for anticipation, adaptation, and prediction. That is the future. And just to be fair, that brings us full circle to the digital twin metaphor and analogy, because we don't build a digital twin just to make sure that the machines are running appropriately. We're using them for predictive maintenance. We're using them for, how difficult will it be to do a swap out for running things? I mean, Richard, this is the world that you lived in, when you're in your Dell incarnation. This should be old hat. But the flip side is, for many organizations, they remain they bareheaded or empty-headed.
Well, maybe that's a good note for us to end on.
Okay.
Most positive note to end on. But I do think that we're going to see, separation again from winners and losers here, right? So there's an inevitable sort of phenomena here where the forward-thinking companies get in front of this and others lag behind. And that's just human nature. I'm back to the reality that we've got a very uneven distribution of capability, of adoption. And to some extent, we shouldn't worry too much. If you're in our audience thinking about what we should do, your first decision is which side of that coin do you want to be on, and is the management ambition there to make it happen? And if that's the case, I think this idea of the simple concept digital twin of your sort of measurement infrastructure is a fundamental capability companies can build, should build. And if they set off with that ambition, I think that they will find themselves at a significant advantage, 2 to 3 years down the road. And I think it's going to be less to do with capability than orientation. I think you said that most of your customers by nature have the right orientation but lack the capability. That'd be true for us as well. I think that's an exercise in adverse selection. The marketplace is perhaps struggling with both, or maybe more accurately, capability concerns are dwarfing orientation or concealing orientation issues. They like to sort of blame capability.
I completely agree. The one thing, so what you said inspires me to make 2 quick points. A few years ago, I was working with organizations, and the way to get them to address digital transformation, yes, that's how long ago it was saying, okay, let's set up a red team and Amazon comes into your business. How would Amazon take over your industry and your business? And that was an eye-opener for a lot of people, because they couldn't say it's not possible because Amazon was doing it. So there is a red teaming approach. There's a different flavor of this. I think that one of the great things about LLMs and their current innovation trajectory is that the ability to be a fast follower has been improved. I think that there may be a big market for you in facilitating and enabling organizations to become, quote, faster followers. Here's the snap in the tail. In an exec ed class that I ran, I have them bring their own KPIs, and we do the KPI workshop. And the exercise I began doing was, what's your big competitor? Ask the KPI how its competitor would run the KPI. What would the competitor do? And these are broadly trained. It may have been a little anachronistic, but they literally got a different competitive view of this. And so I'm going to double down on the discussion we had earlier, which is the ability to get multiple insights faster on a common problem set has been radically and dramatically improved. Will that be an effective goad for change? I don't know. It works somewhat well in exec ed, but they've already paid in exec ed. So
I think the other thing I would leave people with, if you're trying to make this decision and you're thinking it's a bit of a big architectural conversation and you need to set up a strategy and teams and all this sort of thing, I'd say remind yourself that in all of these past waves of technology we're talking about, whether it was internet, whether it was mobile, whether it's social, whether it's cloud, these things walk in your doors with your end users first. Embrace a bottom-up ethos. Know the fact that people are going to find their way to interesting use cases amongst themselves, and embrace those early on. I think those are the kinds of things. Now, you can't do it recklessly, but I think this is the way of the world today, is that these technologies come in through this kind of consumerization type effect. All those folks that are thrilled with GPT will find business use cases that are meaningful to you. Embrace them.
Completely true. If your customers, this is a useful heuristic, if your customers and clients are getting demonstrably more value from using LLMs than you are, that's not going to look good in your next meeting. That's just not going to look good.
Self-preservation.
Yes.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much. Michael, always good to see you.
It was a pleasure. I hope this is editable and fixable, and I much enjoyed. Do send me a transcript, because I think we have some good stuff here to interrogate.
Yeah.
All the best.
All right.
Thank
Thanks.
You. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the CX Iconoclast from OCX Cognition. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you won't miss any of our thought-provoking conversations. And please get in touch if you want to learn more about what OCX Cognition's predictive CX analytics platform can do for your business by providing complete insights into every account, continuously updated and connected to operations. You'll find contact info in the show notes.